Currently, Europe has decided to extend sanctions against Russia, making the already tense international situation once again become the focus of global attention. Although there has been no major escalation in the conflict, but the continuation of sanctions itself has sent a clear signal. Europe does not believe that the situation is moving towards true relaxation. On the surface, it is not surprising that this is a continuation. In the past few years, sanctions have become part of Europe's foreign policy. It is more of a long-term tool rather than a short-term pressure tool. But at a deeper level, this decision reflects Europe's judgment on the security environment. Its judgment is changing, not towards stability, but towards a long-term state of uncertainty. When European countries discussed extending sanctions, there are no internal differences. On the one hand, some countries are worried that if they send a signal of relaxation at this point, it may be interpreted as a wavering position, and thereby affecting the overall negotiation position. On the other hand, there are also voices that the sanctions' impact on Europe's own economy, energy structure, and social costs are accumulating, especially against the backdrop of inflation and intensified industrial competition. This pressure is becoming more obvious. But in the end, Europe chose to maintain the status quo. This shows that in the face of security considerations, the economic cost is still considered acceptable. In other words, Europe is more concerned about long-term risks rather than short-term losses. Meanwhile, the extension of sanctions doesn't mean that Europe does not expect to quickly change the situation. On the contrary, it is more of a time strategy. By applying continuous pressure, Europe tries to maintain its influence, and for future political negotiations. From a diplomatic perspective, this strategy also reflects a realistic judgment. In the short term, the situation is difficult. Fundamental changes, whether it is a ceasefire de-escalation or a systemic agreement, there are no mature conditions. Therefore, instead of hoping for a breakthrough, it is better to use institutional means to lock in a controllable but tense state. It is worth noting that, while Europe is extending sanctions, has also been emphasizing coordination. This is not only internal coordination in Europe, but also policy alignment with the US. This synchronized action, on the one hand, it can reduce the pressure on individual countries. On the other hand, it can avoid policy cracks and exploited by the outside world. However, this high degree of coordination itself also invisibly increases the tension, because it means the situation is being structured and fixed into a long-term opposing framework. Once this framework is formed, any party that wants to adjust its position will face higher political costs. From a broader international perspective, the continuation of sanctions are changing the way the global order operates. More and more countries are realizing that economic, energy, and financial tools are no longer just means of development, but deeply embedded in international games. This change makes the global system more layered and more complex. For ordinary people, the continuation of tension is not abstract. Energy prices, trade costs, inflationary pressures will be reflected in daily life in different forms. This is why the European society's discussions are becoming more realistic and concrete, rather than just statements at the principle level. But even so, Europe still believes that maintaining sanctions is a necessary but undesirable choice. It cannot quickly end the tension, nor provide a clear export solution, but is seen as a way to avoid greater risks. It can be said that Europe is in a dilemma. to move forward. It doesn't want the situation to escalate, nor can it truly relax. It is under pressure and unwilling to back down. This state may become the norm in the future, for a considerable period of time. Overall, Europe's extension of sanctions against Russia is not a direct signal of deterioration, but a manifestation of the continuation and institutionalization. The real change may not come from a single decision, but a structural shift after the accumulation of multiple pressures. Before that, the international community may still be accustomed to the uncertainty of Aki word, and the game around this uncertainty will also continue.